Hello again. Last section of the day. Fireside chat. You know me, let me introduce Mark. Mark is our head of research at OpenAI, looking after the research effort, like model development. And Mark was also the lead on O1 reasoning. He's been at OpenAI for quite a few years. Do you want to say a few words about you?
Sure, yeah. So it's nice to meet you all. I've been at OpenAI for over 6 years now, and it's crazy just kind of having it go from a 20-person startup to really this kind of international corporation. And it's great to be back in Singapore. I was here about a year and a half ago, met with a lot of the people on the ground, and I feel like kind of the technical depth of the people we met with was beyond anywhere else that we visited. So yeah, really, you guys are in a great spot.
I agree. Every single meeting for me today and yesterday, I was pretty impressed by the depth, for sure. Awesome. We have 30 minutes. I'm excited. I don't get to put Mark on the hot seat with like hard questions every day, but you know, here we are. You guys left a bunch of good questions in the box, and so yeah, we'll try to get to as many as we can. Let's start. Yeah, actually starting like what excites you about being in Singapore for the event? How do you see Singapore leading in AI?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just how deep the technical depth that you all have. So I remember coming here, right, and meeting the former prime minister, and you know, I gave him a coding demo and learned that, you know, he actually codes himself, and you know, he's done quite a bit of that. And you know, we found that pattern throughout, you know, all the people in government, in business. They just kind of knew the technical details in and out. So that's the thing that makes me most excited.
I have exactly the same anecdote. I was in a meeting with a regulator, like agency this morning. I was prepared to talk about like regulation, high level, like, you know, how does ChatGPT work? We started talking about reinforcement learning, like from the get-go, chain of thought, how does it work? Like the level of depth and pragmatism, I would say, is pretty high, for sure. What was the last time something in AI research surprised you? As in, wow, this is a sci-fi becoming real kind of way.
Good question. You're starting with the spicy ones. Yeah, I think for me, you know, I got my start in AI research in image generation. And I just feel like kind of visual stuff is always very visceral to me. So you know, it's very compelling, right? Like you can see it immediately. You don't have to kind of read a paragraph or something. So you know, just the whole wave of image generation, video generation improvements, like that's just been wow. You know?
Yeah. For me, that would be speech to speech. Like the first time having like a natural sounding conversation with an AI for like a few minutes, and just seeing that, you know, it's actually like very intuitive. Like, you know, there is nothing like weird about it. Like just what I would expect. That was my biggest mind blown, I think, in the past like few months.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to add on that too is, you know, I used to be a competitive programmer. One other big moment was just watching these models slowly like catch up to and even get better than I am, which is very scary.
He's pretty good. That's what's even more scary. Okay, very easy question, Mark. How close are we to AGI?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very hard to answer question just because people define AGI so differently. Right? I think when you look at it from an economic lens, you already see our products providing a lot of economic value, right? Clearly, OpenAI is one of the most valuable tech companies, and we are providing billions of dollars of values to real users today. I think there's a different definition, too, of, you know, are we able to perform well on benchmarks that capture kind of intelligence or the ability to kind of do general tasks? And it's interesting to see just like 2 years ago, those kind of tasks that were the frontier tasks for AIs were grade school math problems. And today, they're the hardest PhD problems. So I do think, you know, we're in the regime where these models are able to solve some of the most difficult exams that humanity has crafted.
How do we benchmark models once they solve PhD level problems? Like what's next?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I do think increasingly we have to lean on utility, right? We have a product out there. We're trying to provide utility and value to the world. And I do think, you know, when you saturate all the benchmarks, like really what you're looking at is like, do I provide value to the end users?
That makes sense. And how has, sorry, I'm drilling down how has like your sort of a mental model of like benchmark versus vibes, like evolved over the past few years doing our research.
What do you mean by that, benchmark versus vibes?
Like, like just qualitative sense, like you use the model, it just feels smarter, it feels better versus, having quantitative like evals.
Yeah. I mean, I do think they're actually quite highly correlated. And really, AGI is kind of a conversation, right? It's like you put a model in the world, and then someone says, oh, well, I know it beats the benchmarks today, but it's not quite capturing what I feel like an AGI is. So then they contribute a benchmark to you, right, where you fail, and then you create another version of the model. And so I do think this is an iterative process. And I do think it's very highly correlated with vibes.
That makes sense. Switching to safety, what is the most exciting safety development for you in the past year?
Also a very good question. So I actually think O1 is probably one of the biggest safety improvements that we've made in the last year. And it's surprising because oftentimes this is framed as a capabilities improvement, but it's also fundamentally a safety improvement as well. And what I mean by that is you can imagine trying to jailbreak a model, for instance, right? And you can think of the old GPT systems as they have to respond immediately, right? And so maybe they're more susceptible to being tricked. But when you have a reasoner, the model can kind of reflect on, hey, is this prompt trying to get me to do something that's not consistent with what I'm trying, or what I should be doing? And that extra amount of time that it gets to think and reflect makes it more robust to a lot of these safety attacks.
Was that something that you and the team expected?
Yeah, no, it very much was. And I think when we think about reasoning, it's something that's very broad-based, right? It's not just something that you use for math, for coding. It's something that's very transferable. Right? The same reasoning that you may use to do well in coding may be applicable to like kind of how you negotiate or how you play a very difficult game. Yeah.
That makes sense. And talking about benchmarks, like do you observe like the same challenge on safety? Like you said, you're ranking all the benchmarks.
Yeah. So I think the good thing is safety kind of mimics this kind of adversarial attack framework. There, the attacks are fairly strong. So I do think we have a ways to go there. I will not claim our models are perfectly robust, and I think there's a very rich set of tasks there to improve on.
Makes sense. What are the key enablers to move us from level 1 today to level 5 of super AI? If you want to remind people like what is level 1 and 5?
Yeah. So essentially, we put out a framework at OpenAI over the last couple of months where we define kind of levels of AGI, and this is progressing from basic reasoners to more agentic systems to models that can take actions in the world, and eventually kind of more autonomous systems, right? Fully autonomous systems. And I do think really like robustness and reasoning is the key there, right? I think the reason you can't rely on a lot of the agentic systems today is they're just not reliable enough. And I think that's also what underlies our bet on reasoning. We've invested so heavily because we think that reasoning is what's going to drive reliability and robustness in the future.
That makes sense. Would you say that we achieved level 2 already? Or, are we getting there? Like,
yeah, no, I do think we are moving from kind of like 1 to 2, right? Yeah. Moving towards more agentic systems. Again, I think today, a lot of the agentic systems do require human supervision. But increasingly, right, like you can see you're more hands-off, right? You let the model do its thing, and we're building more trust in AI systems too.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Let's double-click on synthetic data. First, if you could remind people what it is, and then is there any good practice to generate synthetic data to train models?
Yeah, very good question as well. You can really tell the technical breadth of this crowd. Yeah, so again, synthetic data is data that's not kind of produced by a human, data that's produced by a model. And oftentimes, you see the power of synthetic data in kind of like data poor or like low data quality style data sets. So one example where we've leveraged synthetic data is in training things like DALL-E 3. If you look at the DALL-E 3 paper, one core problem of training image generation models is that when you look at captioned images on the internet, there typically is low linkage between the caption and the image that it's describing, right? Like you could have a photo of a hot air balloon and the caption, instead of describing the balloon, is more like, oh, this was the best vacation I've ever had, right? And I think in those cases, you can really leverage synthetic data, right? You train something that's able to produce a high fidelity caption for your image, and you go and kind of regenerate captions for your entire data set. And we've shown approaches like this to work very well. And you can think of like other areas in which you have like a poor quality on one side of your data set.
That makes sense. Maybe related, is AI hitting a wall?
Yeah. That's a very relevant question today, right? Like, you might have seen some articles recently, saying like, a lot of these large foundation labs are hitting some pre-training walls, or even Ilya has come out and said kind of explicitly that, we may be hitting some walls in terms of pre-training. But I do think our perspective internally is that, we have two live paradigms today. It's an even more rich environment than we had in the past. Like there's this test time scaling paradigm that we've explored with the O series of models, and it's really, really taking off. I don't see the same barriers there to scaling reasoning models. And we actually think that, I've been at OpenAI since GPT-1, and every time you go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, there are technical challenges, right? And often multiple technical challenges. I do think even in the 4+ world, we have a handle on exactly what technical challenges we need to solve. And they're very concrete. I don't think they're anything that we really just don't have a handle on.
That makes sense. Yeah, something we like to say at OpenAI internally is that the reasoning paradigm is currently at the GPT-2 level of maturity.
Yeah.
Some product market fit, but so much still room for improvement. And yeah, we see it like in the application, the products that people are building quite a bit. Yeah. Spicy. Is OpenAI still as committed to research and safety as it was in the early days?
No, 100%, yeah. Actually, I lead the research team. I manage a very large portfolio of research projects. And of course, I think high level all the time about, how much should I be allocating resources, manpower to exploratory research versus, to kind of immediate short-term wins. And I do think, as a matter of principle, we allocate more resources to doing exploratory research. And I do think we have a different style than the other labs. When you look at kind of other big foundation labs, they have a style because they have so many kind of good researchers. They can have them all do like undirected research projects and just kind of, let them out kind of on the world, and whatever they want to work on, they work on. For us, we're a smaller lab. We have to be a little bit more directed. So we pick specific exploratory bets that we have high conviction in. And then within those areas, we let the researchers really have a lot of freedom, right? So I think this gets the best of both worlds. We don't have a little bit aimless exploration. We really have directed exploration and leverage our small size well.
Makes sense. What model capability do you use the most personally? And what model capability are you most excited to see others use creatively?
Yeah. So, one of my recent favorites has been our search models. Yeah, they're actually very useful. I think I really don't like the process of searching for information. You have to wade through so many links. I think the links today are really kind of bloated with a lot of ads and just kind of content that's not relevant. So I use that a lot just kind of to do information gathering on any kind of subject. I use it for learning a lot too. Whenever there's some kind of topic that I'm not familiar with, I think ChatGPT today is my default app. And I'm a researcher by trade. I think having stepped into this role, I think I've had to learn a lot more about the business and different parts of OpenAI. And I've actually found ChatGPT to be a really tremendous resource there. And actually, I'm curious for your take on this, Olivier. What do you use mostly?
My most surprising use case of the past few weeks has been brainstorming with O1. It took me a few weeks actually to recalibrate on what sort of queries could I send to ChatGPT. And O1 versus 4O has brought a new level of depth. It feels finally like a sparring partner who is truly engaging with the ideas versus just commenting them. I was doing a bunch of pretty strategy stuff in the past few weeks, and it felt like a real entity truly engaging. So yeah, that was pretty incredible.
Oh yeah, I love that. Yeah, I feel like O1 for kind of this strategic planning is amazing. Yeah.
pretty incredible. And like in strategy, usually there is no stupid questions, and so, but of course, it's not like I'm going to ask to people the most basic ones, and having that sort of a neutral but yet engaging thought partner has been pretty stunning.
To the contrary, I ask a lot of stupid questions, and that's why I love ChatGPT for stupid questions.
Someone was giving me a good question, would you prefer someone to take a look at your search history or your ChatGPT history?
Yeah, I cannot show the researchers.
Exactly, at that point, it's, it's locked, it's mine. Let's talk about O1. How did you come up with the intuition about the reasoning and O1?
So again, this was a collective effort, but also one that we've run for a very long time. So remember the point I made about kind of having exploratory focused bets? This was one of these bets more than 2 years ago. And really we had conviction that today, the models are lacking, right, in certain ways. They feel incredibly smart, but somehow there's something about it which doesn't feel quite like AGI. And back then we had a hypothesis that it's really that it has to respond right away. And when you think about a human, right, you put them in some spot, you ask them to respond right away, they're not going to give you the best answers, right? A human is going to think for a variable amount of time depending on what you're asking, right? Sometimes a human might say hey, I need to think for a while, or I'll get back to you tomorrow, right? I need to kind of do some research. And really we felt one missing thing here was bridging the gap between system 1 and system 2 thinking, right? This fast thinking is there, the knowledge is there, but the slow thinking is not. So really that was the core hypothesis that we had. We actually had a lot of different bets aimed at addressing this core challenge. And I think O1, watching it kind of take off has been really fantastic process, right? It was a group of very kind of exploratory researchers. They got some small signs of life. And then kind of when we got those signs of life, we just organized around that. We put together research teams, we scaled the projects, we put kind of big data generation efforts behind it, big scaling efforts, big infrastructure efforts, and yeah, I think we were able to kind of fulfill the promise of that initial ambition.
How long did it take to get conviction on these signs of life?
Yeah, I think that's always the hardest part of research, right? In the beginning, especially when you're working on something that feels a little bit more like a moonshot project, you're going to have a lot of misses. And I think it's really about protecting the researchers who are doing that, right? If you believe strongly in a direction, it's a matter of time before it works out. So you just have to let the researchers just try all the different approaches. Yeah, certainly there were stretches of 3-4 months where it didn't feel like we were making that much meaningful progress. But then eventually someone makes a big breakthrough and you're okay, well, this gives us enough energy to put more resources, push a little bit further. And yeah, that's really the joy of kind of managing this large portfolio of research projects.
It's been a couple of months since you launched O1. What are the biggest surprises or learning? How far people have been using it?
Yeah. So I think we've already engaged with a lot of external partners. I think one cool thing is they found it just strictly better than kind of using a fine-tuning approach, for instance, right? I think a lot of people find that it's less kind of able to get tripped up on hard questions, and I do think there's been a lot of applications that have been outside of the domains of math and science that we focused a lot on, and it's just cool to see the reasoning really generalize over to those kind of things. When you look at medical domains, right? We've seen kind of partners try to put in, here's a list of symptoms, here's a list of anti-symptoms, and what is a disease consistent with all of this? And the model can do this a lot better than 4.0, right? Because this involves forming hypotheses, invalidating them, forming new hypotheses. So we're seeing a lot of benefits, even in places that we didn't explicitly kind of focus too much attention on.
That was my biggest surprise as well. We knew that the model was good on math, science, coding, and that's what we were focused on testing. But seeing the model work pretty well on legal reasoning, which on paper seems pretty far away, but it's actually logic, and that's been pretty amazing. And I'm sure there are many other topics dimensions, areas out there that we haven't fully tested yet.
How quickly do you think we can get O models to everyone? In terms of custom O models.
Custom. I think So it's funny because at the moment when people customize models, like fine-tune model, it's mostly superficial, right? Like for Thor, it's mostly like style, tone, formatting. I think O1 is a very different flavor of like fine-tuning. It feels much more like an expert model that goes really deep on a specific task. So I expect the types of use cases that will be built on top of O1 fine-tuning will be very different. I think it's a matter of a month or two.
Wow.
You know, that's sort of a, yeah. What's the next biggest challenge for a startup using AI as a core feature?
Biggest challenge for, sorry.
Biggest challenge for a startup using AI as a core feature.
I see. Well, I actually do think it's a quite good time to be building startups on top of AI, right? Like, I think when you look at foundation model players, right, like we focus on generality, right? And really at a company like OpenAI, it's impossible for us to go into every single vertical. And I think there's just so much room and so much work that you can do, kind of tailoring a model to be very functional in a particular domain. And I do think you're seeing that today, right? Like, I think you see a rich ecosystem of startups kind of building on top of OpenAI for different types of applications. I'm curious what you think. I think this is a great question for you as well.
I think usually, like, the reason why startups win is that because they know and have conviction on a secret that, right, the rest of the market does not. And I feel like with AI, like, essentially you're building like on a tech stack which is constantly moving. Like, you cannot predict when the next model will come up, what will be like the next capabilities that are unlocked. And so I feel the startups that do best are usually the startups who have like an intuition and are building like right at the edge of stuff which is barely working, but there is a sign of life, a bit like research. Yeah. And, you know, when the next generation, like O1, O2, you know, comes up, like it unlocks like it makes the feature just more reliable. So yeah, easier said than done, but I feel that's a pretty good recipe, like, you know, to build something really cool. Do you have plans to expand prompt caching? Maybe I can take that one.
Oh yeah, you should take it.
So prompt caching essentially is a really cool feature that we shipped a month ago. Which essentially, what we do is that we cache essentially most recent input tokens. And that saves up latency, like, you know, you don't have to go through the whole GPU and everything, and that saves on cost. I think massive adoption, massive usage and love, so, you know, we'll keep investing in it. I think prompt caching is becoming more and more important because of longer and longer context windows. If you want to move to a world where applications are like truly agentic, you will need to pass a lot of context on, like, you know, previous interaction with the users and, like, you know, a better context. And so in a way, you have to find ways to optimize the cost. I think the dimension that we are most interested in prompt caching, frankly, is, like, you know, make it like even more cost efficient, like even, like, you know, more discounted. Have longer cache windows. At the moment, you know, it really depends on like many parameters, but we're trying like to expand. And something that we want to keep as an invariant is we decided as a design like principle to make opt-in automatic by default, right? Like, you don't have to pass any parameter or just know about prompt caching. We just like discount, cache and discount. And so I think we'll double down on that. Like, people have loved it, and I think that was the right choice. Oh, wow. If you could time travel 10 years into the future, oh, man. What's one AI breakthrough you would be thrilled to see?
I do think, you know, if you ask most people at OpenAI today, 10 years from now, you know, we'll have AGI, even in a fairly strong form. So really, like, it unlocks the full potential. Like, you can imagine one person, right, in a week, creating a mega startup, right, that delivers immense value to everyone. I think really just kind of the ability for one person to just leverage themselves and create impact just becomes wild, right? And I do think kind of the first domains where you will see this kind of improvement feels like it's software.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I love the one-person massive impact, like in a few days thing, and I think you could expand it beyond business. I kind of love like the, you know, the sort of the nostalgic, like in the 17th century, scientists were like in the room just doing something and like, you know, revolutionizing physics. And I wonder if we could get back to that vibe, like, you know, one person being able to do some massive like scientific discovery on like medicine or physics or, you know, I don't know, computer science. But of course, by being assisted so much by AI, like that would be insane. How do you see interdisciplinary collaboration, like with sociologists, impacting AI research?
Yeah, so I do think, increasingly with O1 models, we are kind of reaching out to external experts and partners. So we've done a lot of collaborations with, very famous mathematicians like Terry Tao. We've done collaborations with people in national labs in the United States. And we're seeing how they use the models. And honestly, these are the people today who are telling us they're getting a lot of impact from the models. And so I do think these external collaborations are things that we're leaning into more and more. I also think specifically kind of more towards the sociology angle, we want to kind of define AI policy as a conversation with external experts as well. I think safety isn't something that you decide internally in isolation. It's something that you really have to engage the public with and figure out what the right kind of way to tailor models for any particular group is.
I agree. That's one of my biggest learning of the past couple of years. Clearly, models encode values. At that point, it's clear, and people are using them more and more. If you fast forward a few years and people are using AI 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day, at that point, you have a huge responsibility. And it's clearly not one company or even one country, frankly, who is going to impose top-down those values. And so need to find a way, essentially, both to sort of decide how to get there and mechanisms for people to declare in a way, people, communities to declare their values. That was a pretty big insight. Yeah. A friend asked me if they should learn coding. I'm not sure, because as a senior engineer, I noticed my job is changing from coding to reviewing code from AI. So I feel I feel seen. So I feel industry-level coding is going away. What is your advice?
Yeah, so I actually wouldn't advise people today to just stop learning coding. I think fundamentally when you learn coding, you're actually learning kind of problem solving and general reasoning. This is actually a skill that allows you to be kind of robust to a lot of changes, right? You'll make kind of more rational decisions, more principled decisions. And even when it comes to AI, I think there's a lot of value in people who are able to understand the internals of what are going on, and that allows you to better use these tools. So I do think for a long time, the people who really deeply understand coding, machine learning, are the people who are going to be the ones steering AI.
Would you learn coding in a different way? If you were 18 or whatever, 15 today, how would you do it?
Oh, I'm so jealous of the people who are 15 or 18 today. I mean, yeah, it's just back then, right? When I was growing up, the internet was just coming up, right? It was very hard to kind of figure out how do you get the right resources to learn something. Today, you just ask ChatGPT, right? I think it's almost like this tailored curriculum for yourself, right? You don't understand something, immediately someone helps you dig in more. And one study that I've always really loved in the past was, people learn in very different patterns. Some people, they learn very linearly, right? You give them a curriculum, they kind of learn at a particular rate. Some people, they get stuck, right? It's they get stuck for a while and then they have a breakthrough, and then they get stuck at a new thing. And I do think this just really unlocks personalized learning. And today I do so much of my learning in that way instead.
Yeah. All right, we have time for one last question. What is one thing people would not guess about working at OpenAI? Maybe a team quirk or a tradition?
Yeah, I mean, OpenAI is a very quirky place, of course. Yeah, I actually think one thing is, even though we're here developing AI, OpenAI is a very human place to work. I just think, people are very kind. I think almost everyone goes out of their way to help other researchers, onboard, get familiar with the tools. It's a very kind of driven place. I think people feel empowered. We want people to feel empowered to seek impact and make impact. It's also a very fluid place, right? We don't tell researchers, hey, you're going to work on this thing. They figure out with us what they want to work on. And I think that's very powerful because researchers are motivated by what excites them, right? And I think you can't make a breakthrough if you're not kind of deeply excited about the thing you're doing. So I just think there's this culture of excitement about pushing the field forward, really kind of helping each other out and being a kind place to work. What would you say?
I feel the same on the product engineering side. It's the first time I feel it in a company. The mission is very clear, everyone is driven, but then the how is pretty much left to the teams. And to me, the way I interpret it is, it's essentially the research lab roots. You empower people, you give them space and agency, and they will surprise you essentially with the outcomes. And so whenever we decide like what product to roll out next, like, what to do in ChatGPT, it's not like, Sam is like every week telling us like, hey, that pixel, like move to the left, etc. It's like, trusting us. So that would be one. Second, like I would double down on like the humility kindness, especially because like the OpenAI mission is like so grandiose. I feel people like think that, that's all we talk about like every day. But I feel like people on a daily basis like are just so like approachable and like humble. Like, I wouldn't trade it like for any other place. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Mark.
Olivier.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.